Hello, everybody. Welcome back to Blessfest for our third and final day. Blessfest is a global online festival. My name is John DeCott, and I'll be your host for this last and final day. It's been wonderful to be with you on Friday and Saturday. We jumped online, this festival jumped online at this point in the pandemic experience because we feel like now more than ever, we all need support through this challenging, turbulent, and awakening time. And we also want to envision a new earth, a new way of being in relationship with ourselves and each other. The mission for Blessfest is to encourage us all to face difficult aspects of being human with equanimity, with self-inquiry, with tolerance, with compassion, with music, with art, and with wisdom. It's a community that shares, envisions a world with greater social justice and sustainability and loving kindness. And it's a community that shares in contemporary and ancient sacred practices as a means of opening our hearts and remembering and restoring that deep peace that is within us and sharing it with the world. This is a free festival. It's a donation-based festival. And all profits from this event are going to an emergency COVID fund, which is helping helping families that are marginalized. Many of them are immigrants that are really struggling economically through this COVID crisis. And what these families all have in common is they all have a child in their family who has cancer, which makes it triply tough, obviously. So the charity is Lucy's Love Bus that is championing this work. And we've been hearing from Beecher, the director of Lucy's Love Bus, all weekend, and we hear from her again today. And she shares with us stories about the families and just the fabulous work that they're doing. So any donation you can give at this point, we understand some aren't in a place where they can give, and that's completely fine. But if you are, know that this is going to people that are really in need. The COVID experience in the world has brought up the great disparity of well-being and wealth and has made it that much more evident. And so people are in that much more need right now. So we're so honored to be able to help out in this small way and to know that these funds are going to right to where it's needed most. So a couple quick things. One is when some of our gigs and offerings are pre-recorded and some aren't. So when they're pre-recorded, you can actually be going backward and forward and be watching it at any given point. So sometimes what happens is if our production tech manager, it's time to switch to the next person, it might appear like you got cut off in the middle of a performance, but it's because you might have been watching it either earlier or later. So if you can, try to get there on time, or if you want to see it till its completion, push it. Make sure you're watching the very front end of the video as it's being made available. So that'll limit the possibility of you feeling like you just got cut off before it ended. Some artists weren't able to do live, so we pre-recorded them. They were generous enough to pre-record. And and you also have to refresh your screen every now and then when we put up, especially if it's not going live and it's a pre-recorded thing, you might have to hit the refresh button just to get the page clear. It's the technological virtual age. We are all adapting. We've had our technological bumps along the road as we go, but it's we're figuring it out. And we appreciate your patience. So we have a wonderful next presenter. I met this man a few years ago, and I've had many dear friends who have studied with him and rave about his expertise and his mastery of understanding and comprehension of yoga on many different levels. My dear friend Jafar Alexander, we're so honored blessed to have him sharing his gifts with us, and he has practiced yoga for many, many years and is a devoted practitioner and studier of the deep texts of yoga, and is a great voice for bringing these ancient, sometimes mystical, difficult to understand texts down into the grounded, practical reality of how does that impact my day-to-day life? What does that look like? And today he's focusing on healing trauma. So we all have trauma, and what a beautiful way we can use aspects of yoga to heal the trauma that we all can store in our tissue, in our bodies. So Jafar teaches online all the time. He's a big presenter for Gaia.com. You can check out his stuff at jafaralexander.com. I'm just going to do a short poem I wrote years ago about yoga and healing trauma in that way. And then I'm just going to disappear and hand it over to Jafar. I'm a poetry freak, and so each time you guys have to deal with a little bit of poetry, I apologize. This poem's called A Pearl. Drop into your body and explore the old pain, ducking behind new stories. Drop into your body and explore the old pain, ducking behind new stories. Like blood returning to frostbitten flesh. Don't keep steering down the same old street where there are no children playing. Turn with all your nerves, turn with all your nerves, and visit where your grief is tucked away. The diamond is amongst the hardest rock. The diamond is amongst the hardest rock. And the pearl sinks to the ocean floor, enclosed within its shell.
Whenever you're ready, Jafar.
Hello, everybody. Thank you, John. So beautiful, so beautiful. I'm always moved by
everybody.
John's stuff.
Thank you, John.
I just wanted to say I'm super honored to be a part of this offering, this festival, and all the amazing artists and teachers and human beings that are a part of this. It is truly an honor for me to be here with you, and thank you for taking time out of your life to sit with me for a little bit. And we're going to have a little conversation today. Where to begin? So we have a little bit of time today to discuss, and what I would love to bring to you today is, as John was saying earlier, is that the practice of yoga for a very long time, without putting a date on it, for a very long time, through the course of human history, has approached trauma, has approached suffering from some different lenses. And so what I would love to present to you today, or offer you today, is an option to get to the nitty gritty, an option and an offering to get to the essence of what yoga is trying to say, and the essence of what trauma is in our understanding today, and then some applicable tools that we can use to help alleviate the suffering, to lessen the grip that trauma has on all of us. I'd love to start off by saying that as human beings, all of us have experienced trauma to some degree. Now, there's a big spectrum there, right? From kind of simple or a situational trauma all the way to complex trauma. So we all fall on that spectrum somewhere as human beings. And so today what I want to offer you is a simple way to come back home to ourselves, to come back into this space where we feel safe and nurtured, to come back into this space of ourselves and our communities, but first and foremost ourselves, and to see ourselves as a sanctuary, a place of safety, a place of feeling like we are once again have some dominion and some agency and some influence over how our lives and our realities look. So with that, let's just begin simply by understanding that the practice of yoga. Now, when I say the practice of yoga, I'm speaking to the practice of yoga that precedes what we'd like to call prefix yoga. So, regardless of the name that you put in front of the word yoga, we're speaking to the yoga that kind of precedes all that, that is the parent to all the other prefix yogas. And this isn't to negate or demote or diminish the power that every prefix has adding to the practice of yoga. What I'm speaking to is, especially because we have limited time, let's look at what is the heart of yoga. So no matter which text you bring up, right? So whether or not you read the Yoga Sutra, the Mahabharata, the Ramayana, the Bhagavad Gita, any of these texts, the Upanishads, the Vedas, let's get to the kind of heart of what yoga is. And I would love to start here and give you an understanding that in Sanskrit, in the language that is used by yoga, nothing is ever this word means this thing, right? It's contextual, and it says this word can mean this, and this, depending on the context in which you're using it. So we're going to take that idea with the practice of yoga for a moment and look at yoga in its essence, in its form that can weave into all these other layers that we find itself in. Is yoga is first a desire. It's a desire to come home to a sense of wholeness, a sense of well-being, to the sense of integration. So at first, each individual, each community has a desire to be integrated, to come into a place of togetherness, of wholeness, of union. A lot of times we hear this referred to as. Yoga is also a philosophy. It's a philosophy of what does it mean to be whole? What does it mean to be separate? This is where we start to get into the dualistic nature of things and the non-dual. So we get into Advaita, Vedanta, and these type of things. And so it looks at a philosophy of like, what does it mean to be whole? Does that include everything, or does it include this but not this? Right? So it's also a philosophy. And from an understanding there, we get into a method. So yoga is also a method. It is a means of devising a plan of action that will bring us back to this place. It's an assumption that we are here and we need a method in order to come back here. And so yoga is also a method. And on top of that, from that method, so we have this desire, and then we have philosophy, and then yoga as method. And then we get a really, really important part of this, and this is yoga as action. And yoga becomes that verb, it becomes this action. Yoga is the art and the effort that it takes to walk back home to ourselves, to walk back home to this not only integrated individual, but to also walk back home to this integrated community, this integrated existence. And from that action, then there is the realization. And the realization, so yoga is also the realization. Yoga is the realization that we were never separate in the first place. It was the illusion that we were separate. It was all the things that we put in the way of remembering that we've always been whole, that we've always been connected, that we've always been in a good space. And this is where we start to find trauma or suffering. It is this suffering or trauma that yoga begins to look at as it is the things that we put in the way of who we actually are, the truth of ourselves and the truth of this moment in reality of existence. It is the things that we put in the way of that we then identify as ourselves, or we then identify as reality. And those things then become these obstacles that lead towards suffering, that lead towards trauma, that lead towards a misidentification of what we like to refer to as the direct experience of life. So, to make this very simple, yoga is a process of coming home to ourselves. So let's look at this in one way, right? I enjoy analogies. They help me to understand things and make it a little bit more applicable. So if you have a house, right? Let's say that your body is a house. A house is a structure. It is a place that you can go to. It is a geographical location. But what really makes a house a home is the way that you inhabit that house. It's the way that you inhabit the body, the way that you inhabit your community, the way that you occupy, the way that you exist. And this is where yoga is really concerned with, is it's saying, let's get back to not just identifying the house or the structure of ourselves or society. Let's get back to how we inhabit those spaces. Let's get back to how we choose to occupy these moments of life. One quick thing with the idea of the difference between a home and a house is that a home, in order for something to be a home, there are some certain characteristics or qualities to this. And some of those characteristics or qualities are, it feels safe. There is a nurturing presence to it. There is a comfort to it. There is a sanctuary aspect to it. And so the whole practice of yoga then says, okay, let's go back to that method part. What methods do we need to transition from a house to a home, to transition from the physical body as I to the actual thing that lives inside of I, to transition from the things that have happened to this to the thing that has always been here, that has always resided here, right? And you know, one of the things I love about this festival is there's so many beautiful artists that share their music and their talents in that way. And music is such an amazing tool and vehicle to take us back into that feeling state of what it is to be in this safe sanctuary called me and community. So with this understanding, we can start to look at separation, suffering, trauma as the things that get in the way of us coming home to ourselves. Right? And this is a very big thing as we move forward, right? Because once again, today we're not going to become traumatologists, right? We're not going to dive into all the science behind trauma. We're not going to dive into all the philosophy behind yoga. We're going to look at kind of the essence of this and then see what are some tools that we have to address this on a day-to-day level. So trauma, suffering, separation are the things that come in the way of and that we then identify. For instance, one way that we can look at this is trauma becomes the story that we tell ourselves of a situation that happened or continues to happen, right? If it's kind of complex trauma. And what this means is that when there are moments in our life where something happens that was unexpected, something happens that we feel unprepared for, something happens that we feel that there is a sense of loss of control for, this becomes the recipe for that moment being a traumatic experience. So really any moment can be trauma or a traumatic experience. If we feel unprepared, if we feel like it was unexpected, and we feel like we had a loss of control in our influence and in our negotiation of how we exist in that moment. So when those three factors are present, all of a sudden these stories start to come in. And when the stories start to come in, we start to tell ourselves these stories time and time and time and time again. And we get stuck in these stories. And what happens is we lose the essence, or what we call the learning of what happened in that story, what I need to take from that story so that I can move forward into the next moment of my life with a sense of ease, with a sense of safety. But instead of taking that lesson that's at the very heart of the story, we take the stuff that's wrapped around that lesson, the story. And so we say, you know, I'm a big fan of this little analogy that, let's say that you go downstairs, you bump your toe on a table, all of a sudden you bump the toe, there's going to be pain, and then you start telling yourself a story about the pain. And you say, oh, I can't believe I put this table here. Why is this table here? But why did I come downstairs anyway? And why did I have to like take the dog out or go do the dishes or this, that, and the other? If it wasn't for that, I would have never bumped my toe. And we keep telling ourselves this story. When in essence, the pain can be there of that moment, right? Because there is pain in life. The pain can be there, but I can let the pain subside and I can release the story. I can take the lesson learned, which is like, hey, maybe I should pay more attention when I'm walking through the house instead of my mind drifting to the past or the future. Let me be present so that I don't stub my toe. Then I can move on with the rest of my life and the rest of my day in a still very safe, nurturing, comfortable type of way, instead of telling the story and then I tell my friend the story and then I tell another friend the story, and I tell a coworker the story, and I tell somebody I meet at the grocery store the story, and eventually I believe the story and I lose the lesson. And this is where we get caught in kind of our traumatic cycles. And in the world of yoga, throughout the text, from sutra to Upanishad to so on and so forth, we find this idea of these become our swirling thoughts that are caught in the field of our mind called our chitta. And these swirling thoughts become our vrittis. And these vrittis is what we then pay attention to. And we get so hung up in the vrittis that we forget about the person who's always been in here and the person who is unchanging. That what I like to call the you of you. So from this place, we start to say, okay, all right, how now can I shift from the story? How can I shift from that one moment in time influencing and controlling and dictating all the future moments of my life? How can I shift that a little bit? All right. And one of the ways that we can shift that a little bit is through some of the tools that we have in yoga. I want to offer this idea real quickly, just to give a real brief glimpse of what this looks like in our body. In our body, the way that our minds work is we have some different parts of our mind and different parts of our nervous system. And in essence, we have this part of the mind that is a very essential part. And when I speak to these, it's not to downplay one part and to promote another part of the mind. They're all important and they're all necessary. The key is, can you get them to work together instead of starting to separate? So typically, something happens in our life that we felt unprepared for, and it was unexpected, and there was a loss of control. And then what happens is a certain part of our mind, this limbic system part, with our amygdala and our hippocampus and some other parts of the mind, they get involved and they start to take over. And this is where our emotions reside. This is where our emotions are found. And this part of the brain starts to take over. And as that part of the brain starts to take over this limbic system, what it does is the limbic system is very greedy. So as the limbic system really turns on, it starts to turn off some of the other parts of our mind. And one part of the mind it starts to turn off is our cerebral cortex. And one of the reasons that that's important and why I bring it up today, because the cerebral cortex is the part of the mind that processes language, determines identity, that allows us to rationally think or to critically think. And that part of the mind starts to turn off as the limbic system or the emotional mind starts to turn on more. So when we get stuck in that, limbic system is just pumping, right? It's starting to tell our hypothalamus and our pituitary gland and some other parts to pump out all these stress hormones and glucocorticoids and cortisol. And then we end up in kind of this storm inside of ourselves where we never feel safe in here. So part of our job is, how can we not turn off the limbic system? Because the limbic system is important. Emotions are important. How instead can we bring the limbic system down to turn the cerebral cortex back up a little bit so that these two pieces can work together instead of in conflict with each other? And this is where the practice of yoga comes in. It has these certain tools to say, you know what, let's just get back to a more equal place. And from that equal place, we can start to discern. Right? In yoga, we speak of this as viveka, or this discriminative discernment. We can start to discern what is happening right now, so we're not stuck in a story from the past, and we can start to discern and have clarity in, am I really at threat right now, or am I not in threat right now? If I'm in threat, let me act accordingly and let me remove myself from the threat. But let me not let the trigger tell me I'm in threat when I'm not in threat, when I'm not in harm's way. And so let me get back to that part of the mind that can discern or figure out, like, you know what, that's just a story from the past that I'm bringing with me into my present moment. And this is a big part. And one more piece physiologically to speak to, a lot of the work that's been done in the field of trauma right now centers around Dr. Stephen Porges' work with polyvagal theory. And once again, I'm not going to go fully into the entire polyvagal theory, but to give you an idea, you have this nerve, right? One of the coolest nerves we have throughout our body that comes out of the brain, comes down, splits in two, comes along the side of the neck, comes down, it moves to the lungs, it moves to the heart, it moves down into the gut and through all of our major organs, about 10 major organs that it moves through. And the cool thing with this vagus nerve is that this vagus nerve not only takes information from the brain down into the body, but this vagus nerve allows for information from the body to move up to the brain. And this is very, very important. It allows this process to happen where sometimes the mind will say, I am stuck in this fear from the past. I have been triggered. I have been reminded, what we like to call treminders. I've been reminded of this trigger that's happening. And the mind will say, run, flee, get out. You're not safe. Whereas the body's like, no, actually, we're cool right now. When that vagus nerve has a small tone, or when it's not as active as it can be, the mind is not hearing information from the body. So what we do is we do some things to increase vagal tone, or to increase the ability for the vagus nerve to transmit the information from the body up to the mind and say, you know what, we're okay right now. There's no need to freak out. Let's be in this present moment, and let's be in this place of realizing that I am safe right now. I am in a place where I don't have to flee. I'm not at threat. And we have some different tools to work with this vagus nerve in the practice of yoga. Let me offer something here that a long, long time ago, in the kind of pantheon of yoga literature, there was a concept that was offered, right? And it kind of first came through Sankhya philosophy, if you're familiar with that. And Ayurveda does a lot of work with this concept, and it's called the gunas. And the gunas speaks to the qualities of energy. And the reason I bring these up right now is the gunas speak to three characteristics of energy. There's the idea that there's energy, plain and simple. But energy can manifest in these three kind of distinct ways. And you have one which is rajasic. And rajasic speaks to this active, dynamic, moving, get it done kind of energy. And then you have tamasic on the other side, which is kind of this cooling, lethargic, still, silent, quiet kind of energy, or characteristic aspect of energy. And then you have the balance of those two, which sits right in the middle of that spectrum, called sattva. And sattva is that harmony, that balance, that place where the two are in harmony with each other, are in equilibrium with each other. And the reason I bring this up is because when we look at the polyvagal theory and we look at the vagus nerve, we can look at the sympathetic nervous system, which is akin to the rajasic quality. And the sympathetic nervous system is that fight, flight, freeze. It's that activity, that thing that we need to turn on the body and send out messages and information and say, hey, we got some things to do. Let's go ahead and have the energy to get that done. And then you have the tamasic quality, and the tamasic quality goes a little bit more towards what we call the parasympathetic, or the part of our nervous system, our autonomic nervous system, that deals more with the rest, digest, rejuvenate, relax, replenish ourselves. And so those become that sympathetic and parasympathetic. And then we have the homeostatic, or this kind of balance place for our autonomic nervous system. And this becomes our sattva. So with that in mind, the way that yoga approached this idea of bringing ourselves back to balance, back to a state of peace, one of the reasons, real quick, that we speak to this as a state of peace is when we really get to the essence of what peace is this inclusion of all emotions that are in balance, that allow us to not be super like, yay, but not be ooh at the same time, right? We're not depressed. We're not manic. We are in this state of balance. We're in this peaceful state, right? We're not super happy, but we're not super sad or angry. We are in this peaceful state. I always think it's interesting that when you look at iconography, or you look at symbols of some of the great sages we've had across human history, whether or not that be Buddha or Jesus or some of the other great sages we've had, whenever you see pictures of them or symbols of them, they never have like this big old smile on their face, and they're never like at the same time. They're just in this neutral, peaceful, tiny little smile place. And that is that peaceful nature. And the reason I bring this up is because peace as an emotion ties in with this sattvic quality, or that harmonious place, which also ties into our nervous system, that homeostatic place, which then ties into the integration of the mind. So the idea is, let me not be way over here on this side. Let me not be way over here on this side. Let me find the place in the middle where I have clarity of both sides and I can make an intelligent decision on how to occupy and embody this moment in time without being influenced from the past or the future. I can sit in the present moment at peace instead of reliving an old thing or living out something that has yet to come, right? So it's a way that yoga starts to work with this idea of trauma, of getting back to this peaceful state of being. When we come back into that peaceful state of being, this is when we start to once again inhabit our house, our physical body, and we start to make it a home. We start to move into what we like to call that direct experience. And at the core of direct experience is where we can remember who we actually are, the part of us that does not change. There's a lot of names that are used for this. It can be your soul, your spirit, your essence, your energy, whatever word feels appropriate to you to use. Being at that place of you that never changes is the return home, the place where I can completely inhabit this space, this moment in that peaceful state so that I can be more than the stories of my past and I can be more than the worries of my future. I can be in a space that is clear on what's right in front of me, on the world that is existing now. And in this way, once again, we bring all the pieces, all the aspects of ourselves home together. We integrate the aspects. So we integrate the body, the mind, the emotions. All these pieces of ourselves come together and live in harmony in that moment. And this is really the 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 objective. And I hesitate to say the word goal, but this is really the direction in which yoga takes us. Um, One of the simplest ways we can look at this is from the Yoga Sutra and this idea that yoga is a process of setting aside or transcending simply the fluctuating thoughts within our mind. It's transcending them or setting them aside for a moment so that we can have that moment of clarity on who we actually are and what this moment actually is. And this even goes back to writings that were around much earlier than the Yoga Sutras called the Upanishads. And it's the idea of coming back to a place where you and reality or the collective, the individual and the collective, can find some common ground. And that common ground in those writings in the Upanishads are said to be what we call the cave of the heart. And this is why so often we speak about going back to the heart. We call this spiritual heart the Hridaya. And it's the idea of let us learn to exist here without negating here. Let me learn to bring these two pieces into harmony with each other. And from that idea, from that theory, from that philosophy or that method, we end up with some different ways in which to approach this. One of the ways in which we end up approaching this is something that many people are familiar with, and this is called Ashtanga. And when I speak to Ashtanga, I'm not speaking necessarily to the Mysore practice of Ashtanga, kind of popularized by Pattabhi Jois and these things. I'm speaking to Ashtanga as laid out by Patanjali in the Yoga Sutra. And so the idea is that these stages or these practices, these pieces, these limbs, these components are all designed to bring us back to this place of clarity where we have our viveka, our discernment on what is real, what is not real, on what is happening now versus what happened in the past. And once we have clarity on that, then we get to choose. And this is a big, big part of this. We get to choose how to occupy our moments. And in the world of trauma, one of the biggest issues is that when we are stuck in our trauma, we feel like there is no place to choose. We don't get to choose. The decision has already been made for us. And so the ability to come home to ourselves so that we can choose how to occupy this is a very, very empowering thing. And once again, there are many tools to take us in that direction. And I would like to offer just a couple of those tools to you today from this understanding. So let's just briefly recap before we get into a couple of those tools. Is that yoga in essence is a process of coming home to ourselves, coming home to truth, clarity, coming home to an integrated space where there is no separation between the individual and the collective. It's the idea to embody the moment and to feel at one with everything in that moment. And I just want to pause here because of Blessfest, and I love kirtan and the mantras and the chanting. And one of the reasons kirtan is so powerful for us is very much in line with this idea of the essence of yoga and this integrated space of the individual and the collective. Is in kirtan a lot of times there's a call and response, right? So you get to say something, and it's the idea that you as an individual have value enough to be heard. So you get to project and say something. You get to chant and sing while others listen. And then what happens is there's also the other side of the story, that those people, those other pieces of existence, they have value enough that they should be heard too. So then what happens is after you chant, then you become silent and you allow yourself to receive. It becomes this beautiful give and take of give and receive, of give and receive, of acknowledging the self and acknowledging the collective. And that interaction, that relationship of those two becomes this journey back home to an integrated place that we call yoga, an integrated place that we call existence, that we call peace. So just a quick little thing on that, and one of the reasons I think kirtan is so powerful. Okay, so we have a process of coming back first into feeling like I can inhabit my body, of coming back first into what we call the direct experience. And when we do that, we have to set aside, or once again transcend, the obstacles or the false identities, the past, the stories that we get stuck into. And some of the ways that we do this, one of the ways that we do this is through the practice of asana. And in the practice of asana, we have this ability to really get present. And one of the reasons I say this is when we look at the expression of asana, or when we look at what asana actually is, and we can go back to the Yoga Sutra for this in the second book in what's called Sadhana Pada, in the 46th to the 48th verse within that second book of the Yoga Sutra, is we get an idea that asana is a space. And what we're doing is we are using the faculties that we have to create an environment in which we can smoothly move into our space of being, right? And what this means is that it is our responsibility as an individual to find the appropriate amount of effort in that particular space, in that particular shape that we're in, whether it be Warrior Two, Shavasana, whatever the case may be. Can you find the appropriate amount of effort so that you can settle in, so that you can become comfortable in that space? And when you do, can you then expand your experience to be bigger than just your body? So let me say this again. We can practice the reducing of suffering and trauma by first coming back into a space where we feel comfortable enough in our body that we become more than just our physical muscular action. So often when asana is practiced, it becomes about the fulfillment of a shape. And it becomes about the fulfillment of this particular pose or posture, is what it's referred to many times. And so when we look back at the yoga, and especially on how yoga can work with trauma, it's forget about what the shape looks like for a moment. Can you first off energetically move your body in a certain way so that you can settle in and inhabit a seat called you, so that you can be comfortable enough to be more than just your body? In that moment, in that shape that you're in, whatever shape it may be, can you become comfortable enough inside, right? So making that house a home, to become comfortable enough inside to realize that I also have a mind working right now. I have emotions working right now. I have thoughts working right now. I have a body working right now. And how can I bring all of those pieces together, right? So in the scope of the asana practice in relationship to trauma, how can I let go of a shape needing to look a certain way? And instead, how can I approach my asana practice, my physical practice? How can I approach this in a way in which I can acknowledge how much effort is needed in this moment so that I can be comfortable enough to breathe well? I can be comfortable enough to inhabit this body in a comfortable state instead of one that is pushing and pulling trying to achieve some outward appearance. That leads us right into pranayama. And pranayama, we can look at, without going into all of pranayama we can look at as a practice of liberating the energy we have inside, a practice of liberating and expanding the prana, this energy that we have inside and around us. So to make this very tangible and applicable, what this is speaking to is a pranayama practice is one in which your breath takes on certain qualities of long, slow, smooth, and fine. And when your breath can become long, slow, smooth, and fine, and the body breathes well, the muscles operate well. But on top of the muscles operating well, the breath is one of the tools that we have that directly correlates to our nervous system, to that autonomic nervous system we talked about earlier. And when your breath becomes long, slow, smooth, and fine, according to yoga and according to science, what happens is the nervous system calms down. We start to move out of that fight, flight, freeze, sympathetic nervous system, and we move into a more balanced place. And as we move closer towards that homeostatic place, what happens is the nervous system starts to calm down enough so it's not in this agitated, I got to get out of here, I'm in threat mode. And as the nervous system calms down, that because of where that vagus nerve, the nerve we talked about earlier, because it innervates or moves through your diaphragm, every time you breathe using your diaphragm, the main muscle of respiration or breathing, it helps to create a tone in that vagus nerve that sends it up to the brain, that opens up the lines of communication between the body and the mind. And through that vagus nerve, now all of a sudden the mind is getting accurate information from the body saying, we're okay. And the body is getting accurate information from the mind being like, this is a good spot. And so as those two start to come together and that vagus nerve, that tone starts to increase, and the sympathetic nervous system, or that kind of danger response, threat level response calms down, our brain once again stops the conflict and allows more integration. That cerebral cortex comes back online. That limbic system calms down a little bit. And we start to look at the moment for what it is, not for what the moment might have been in the past, and not for what the moment might be in the future. It allows us a space of clarity for us to say, this is the moment right now that I can inhabit, and I can choose how I inhabit that. So the ability to breathe smoothly becomes very important. And one little thing that I want to offer you here, without going through 82 different pranayama techniques, is I want to offer you one that I find extremely helpful when it comes to reducing a traumatic episode, or reducing when we do get triggered, right? When something kind of aggravates us and puts us back into that old mind frame, that puts us back into that old habitual thought pattern when there was trauma present. A breath technique that can really help take us out of that and bring us back into the present moment is called Viloma. And Viloma is one technique, and there's many techniques, but Viloma is one that I find to be very helpful when I work with myself and with other people that have experienced trauma or just stress. And there's a lot of different ways you can approach Viloma. One of the ways that I find helpful with Viloma is you just find an easy inhale, and then on an exhale, you're going to take 3 exhales. You're pausing in between each. So it looks a little bit like this. Like I would just take a little inhale, and then I would exhale, and you can do this through the mouth or through the nose. Either way for right now is a very good way. So right now I'll show you through the mouth. So I take a little inhale, and I just pause, pause, and then all the way out. I take a little inhale. And I do this just a few times. And as I do that a few times, I notice everything start to calm down a little bit. That agitation, that frustration, that stress, those reminders start to calm down enough so that then I can go back to my normal breathing, and my breathing isn't stuck up here. It has moved lower in my body. My body starts to come back online into the present moment. And we allow ourselves to step out of that, that triggered place, that reminder place, or once again, what we call the treminder. So think of it with the asana practice is you have an approach to how you move into your physical practice. Can I not try to achieve a certain shape? Can I let go of the right and wrong of a shape? Can I move my body in a general direction? And can I do so in a way that I am using enough effort, but not too much effort to remain in a comfortable state? Now, that doesn't mean a relaxed state, because there's still effort, there's still work to be done, but a comfortable state. And from there, can I then tap back into my breath? Can I feel my breath moving through my body? Can I feel the muscles of respiration moving? And as they do so, can I get back into feeling a sense of being in my body? From there, as the mind starts to come down, now I start to bring that focus in. I start to cultivate the moment of now and release the story of then. And this is where we start to get into that meditative quality of the practice that assists us in working with trauma or stress. And this is, can I stay focused on what's happening in front of me now? And so it can be as simple as picking a part of the body to notice. And as you pick a part of the body, right, can you soften that part of the body? Can you relax it? Can you release it? And it may be as simple as like, let me soften my jaw or my forehead. Let me soften my shoulders. It can also be something where you pick a mantra and you say, you know what, this mantra is going to be my tool to protect my mind from the habitual patterns of thought in the past. And let me bring in this one mantra and let my mind stay focused on this one thing. Let me work on this single pointed focus, or what we call dharana in the practice of yoga. And it's from there that we start to set aside, we start to transcend the swirling thoughts in the mind that keep us stuck in a state of anxiety, that keep us stuck in a state of agitation, that keep us stuck in a state of suffering. Can I transcend them? Can I set them aside, come back to now, and realize that I'm okay? I'm okay. I am now in my home. Even if the situation around me is crazy and out of control, I can still feel at home inside of me. And this becomes our process of meditation. Now, there are lots of different techniques and tools, and you can use finger tapping, and tactile sensation is really nice. You can use rubbing and effleurage and these kind of things, which are beautiful practices. For today, think of this idea of no matter how you stand, whether in line at a grocery store, no matter how you sit, can you create a seat, an asana, in which you can be comfortable enough to experience life that is happening now? And in that space, can you soften your breath without forcing it? Can you liberate instead of control the energy inside the prana? So can I take that couple little breaths where it's just, and as I soften, from that softening, can I come back home to myself? And in coming home to myself, can I then choose an object in which to focus on? And by focusing on that object, I can then notice the qualities in that object that I need at that moment, or the qualities in that object that I find of value in that moment, and see those values inside of me. So once again, this can be your mantra, this can be your asana, this can be focusing on your breath, any object of focus. It can be a picture of a deity or your family or a community. It can be a tree, a blade of grass that brings you back to saying, you know what, I'm okay right now. And as we do this over time, what happens is we start to lessen the grip that trauma has on us. We start to lessen the grip of that old story. And we're very lucky that we have what we call neuroplasticity, or we have all these amazing new ingredients being added to our minds all the time. And then it comes down to, what do you want to do with these? If we keep telling the same story from the past of the event that happened or the multiple events, we're just strengthening that. And we become that story. We misidentify ourselves as that story. Or we can slowly start to whittle that down and write a new story. And one last thing I want to offer you here is that the breath is one of the most important things you can do with this. Let me just give you a quick thing of the science of this. When we allow our breath to become long, slow, smooth, and fine, what happens, and you may notice this, is you start to build more saliva in your mouth. And as you build more saliva in your mouth, you're getting these amazing proteins and this thing called nerve growth factor that is in that saliva. And the reason that's important is because when you're in that state of breathing that way and you feel everything start to calm down and you get back to this peace of place, that nerve growth factor that is promoted, that is supported in its promotion through the way in which you breathe, helps to reinforce the neurons that are now wiring into your brain. And what that means is that the things that you do when you are in that relaxed state, in that peaceful state, the way in which you reinforce that, you get those neurons, you get the brain chemistry to start to rewire itself, and that starts to become your new story. That is how we start to change some of the habits. That is how we start to lessen the suffering. Okay. With all that said, I hope that there is something that you can take away from this today, whether or not it's in the simple clarity that the practice of yoga, no matter where you are in life, is can you simply transcend or set aside the swirling habitual patterns within us to get really, really present. And in getting really, really present, can you then occupy that space, occupy this body and that moment in time in a way that is comfortable? And you can do that by the way that you interact with your body. You can do that by the way in which you breathe. And you can do that by the way in which you focus your mind. And when you find those little things to come home to yourself, you will notice that the more often you do that, the more that you are not only building resiliency against past trauma, but you're also stepping out of and preparing yourself for the possibility of future trauma. When we feel like we have practiced and we feel like we are present, things that happen are no longer unexpected. We no longer feel unprepared, and we understand that within the realm of you always have a sense of control or an influence on the reality of how you exist in this moment. So take that into the way that you practice your asana, your pranayama, in the way that you stand and sit, in the way that you chant. Take that step by step, what we call pade pade. Take that step by step approach into coming back home to yourself, reducing the suffering, and realize that just because a story happened to you in the past doesn't mean that's the only story that you will ever be. And in that way, the practice of yoga becomes your roadmap to coming home from the past of trauma. Thank you very much for letting me share. Once again, I hope that there's something you can take with you today and make it be simple. Sorry, one more thing I want to offer you. One of the biggest mistakes we have made as human beings across cultures and timelines is we have misidentified that something has to be complex in order for it to be right. Sometimes the greatest, most profound moments and understandings that we have are in the simple moments. So let your practice simplify. Let it be a way of walking home. And when you do that, you will find yourself in a good place. You will find yourself in that sukha, this expanded space in which you can be present to life and be present to that interaction of the individual and the collective coming together in harmony instead of in conflict. Thank you for letting me share with you today. All the best. If you have not donated, if it's possible for you, and I know that not all of us have the privilege at this moment to donate, but if it's within you right now, it's such a beautiful cause that Blessfest is working with and Lucy's Love Bus. And the more that we work together as a collective, the better we'll all be in the end. Thank you. I love you all. And thank you, John, and everybody who's put this together. May your day be what it needs to be. Amaha.
Jafar, thank you, brother, for that beautiful and enlightening conversation on yoga. Such an honor to have you here. And check out Jafar and all his teachings and, much of his work. We were fortunate to have him offer us a lecture here today, but he also leads really profound workshops where the things he's talking about becomes experiential. And, that's really where a lot of the healing work can begin and go deeper. So definitely check out Jafar, jafaralexander.com. He teaches really all over the world and is living in the DC area. So if you're near there, take advantage of that as he's in that area more often. Thank you, Jafar. So it's my pleasure to introduce this next group. These next three guys are music teachers of mine from India, and their family lineage is one of the primary pillars of Carnatic music, which is the music from South India. And T.H. Subhash Chandran is kind of the grandpapa of the family, and his father was one of the great founders of many aspects of percussive Carnatic music. And Subhash and his brother have really carried that lineage forward. And I've been honored to be with Subhash many, many times and be with Subhash's primary students, Ganesh Kumar and Hari Krishnan. So they have generously offered and recorded a video for us in South India of their Carnatic music, and hopefully they'll bless us with some all different types of percussions and some solo. T.H. Subhash Chandran has basically been playing the gatam, which is a clay pot. It's a unique clay pot that is specific ingredients that are unique to this instrument. Like it has a little bit of mellow. It has some mellow. It definitely has mellow, but it also has metal in it and bits of tons of clay. Like it's a specific recipe they make for the pot to have. It's not just like they throw clay together and make it. It's a very specific recipe in the pottery that gives it a specific sound. It's a very famous instrument in India, and Subhash is one of the top players and a vocal konakol, which means vocal percussion. Subhash is considered the best vocal percussionist in the world. So hopefully he'll bless us. I haven't seen this video yet, they did, but hopefully they'll bless us with a little vocal percussion. And Subhash has such a big heart. He's such a sweet man. And his primary student, Ganesh Kumar, is an amazing kanjira player. Kanjira is the small little round drum from South India. It's like the size of a rice bowl, but it's got a skin. Typically it was a lizard skin over it, but those poor lizards have become endangered. So now they use synthetic and cloth skins. But it's an amazing drum, tiny, tiny drum. And he makes it sound like he's playing two drum sets at once. So Ganesh Kumar has gotten a Fulbright to the United States. He's taught throughout the United States. He's traveled and taught all over the world and played with many of the master Indian musicians throughout the course of his lifetime. And he teaches online courses. All of these guys teach online courses all the time on Skype and Zoom. So you can check them out online. GaneshKanjira.com is Ganesh's website, and SubhashChandranmusic.com is Subhash's website. And Subhash's son, Hari Krishnan, will be joining them. He's phenomenal. Hari Krishnan has a tremendous understanding of raga, and he plays the piano in Carnatic style South India. But he also, growing up with Subhash, has imbued himself with so much different percussion. So he has this incredible understanding of melody and percussion at the same time. And he's a fabulous pianist who does many movie scores for the Bollywood movies, which, most of the movies in India come out of Mumbai or Chennai, and Hari Krishnan lives in Chennai, where he does movie scores and teaches and performs all over. So we're really blessed to have these three join us. So their name of the group is Shankara, and so we're gonna have them join. And then I also want to introduce the next artist so that you don't have to see my face in between every time. So the next artist is the lovely and amazing Brenda McMorrow, who will be blessing us with her incredible voice. Brenda, she grew up singing like rock and like folk music. And then about 20 years ago, she jumped off into kirtan and has just been singing so beautifully for so many years and writing such creative, amazing, upbeat and downbeat, soothing melodies that have just taken off all around the world. And she travels, plays in Asia and Europe and across America regularly. She has her albums out on White Swan Records. You can find her on Spotify and iTunes and everywhere you'd look for beautiful, sacred chanting music. And Brenda's a dear friend of mine. I've had that honor to play with her a lot. And, we can't have a Blessfest without Brenda McMorrow. So, so she'll be gracing us live. So after we go from we go from heavy percussion, we go into beautiful soaring melodies with Brenda. So thank you for joining us at Blessfest this afternoon. And I think without any further ado, we'll just jump right into Shankara from Chennai in South India. This recorded on Lakeview Road in Mahabalipuram, in West Mambalam, Chennai.